I'm Karla Frizler, a subject matter expert for OTAN, and today we'll be talking about SMART goals for technology and distance learning plans. So if you didn't know what TDLP means, that's what it means, Technology and Distance Learning Plan. This session assumes that you're familiar with TDLP and that you need help writing section G, which is the goals, outcomes, and evaluation. So if you haven't already, please answer the poll question at the bottom of the screen about your experience with TDLP. It looks so far like most people have either been the one responsible for submitting and have had good experience with it, or that this is either your first time or you've been advisory but you haven't actually done it yourself. And just so you know, at the far left in the pod that says Files 2, you can download this presentation with my notes, actually, a handout that includes all the references to websites that I mentioned throughout the session, and then also the implementation guide, the updated implementation guide for the TDLP. And that is something that you will want to have handy with you as you're working on your plan. So let's go ahead and get started. Today we will discuss one possible framework for setting, tracking, and evaluating your TDLP goals, and that's the SMART framework. Of course, there are others available as well. Today's topics include introduction to the SMART goal setting framework, becoming familiar with the implementation guide, which is required reading this year. So again, you can download that from the Files pod. We'll also be evaluating some sample goals and seeing if they fit the SMART framework, and then learn about some valuable resources to use after the webinar. So hopefully this is what you were looking for today. The expected outcome for today's session is for you to be able to apply the SMART framework to the goals for your agency's TDLP plan. So why did OTAN ask me to create this webinar? Well, I think they're hoping that a proactive approach will result in more plans being accepted upon initial submission rather than returning with notes for improvement followed by resubmission. And the area that tends to need the most improvement by agencies is in goal setting. And over the last few years, we've seen a lot of new agencies coming on board and people having this responsibility that may not have done it before. And I think you can see in the poll results, 8 people who are here right now have said this is their first time working on it. So there's no shame in not knowing any of this. So that's what we're here to help you with today. And a little bit of information about me. I've been a subject matter and technology integration expert for OTAN since 2013. And I have over 20 years of experience in adult ed, mostly adult school and community college. I was the EL Civics coordinator for Torrance Adult School for 12 years. And during that time, I helped our WIOA program monitor, Portia LaFerla, write, track, and evaluate our TDLPs. So I learned from the absolute best. And in all those years and the years since, TAS has never had a plan returned for revision. So those of you who've already tackled this, you know that's no easy feat. And hopefully our experience can help other agencies move forward, particularly those who are new to the planning process. So before we go any further, let's look at what a SMART goal is. We'll define that now. So the first thing I want to share with you is a description of the acronym. SMART is an acronym. And I want to show you the original intent and then show you how it has been adapted for the TDLP implementation guide. That's the version that you should follow in your planning and what we will follow for the rest of this webinar. So first, S stands for specific. You target a specific area for improvement, maybe a specific targeted population of students, for example. Then the M stands for measurable. Somehow you need to quantify or at least suggest an indicator of progress. How will you know that your goal was successful at the end of your project? Now, in the original framework, A stood for assignable. Basically, is there somebody who can actually do the work? R stood for realistic. So you state what results can realistically be achieved given the available resources. That concept is very important to us in education in particular, because we tend to have limited resources, for example, compared to the private sector, which is where the original framework came from. And then T in SMART stands for time related. And you'll see this as time bound, time frame, but time is involved. You're going to state when the results can be achieved. So now let's look at the adaptation that you'll see in the implementation guide. And you can find this on page 5. So specific, we still have the same S. Yay, something stayed the same. And measurable. Okay, so those two stay the same as the original framework. Where you start to see a change is with A, which now in your implementation guide stands for achievable. Okay, and just as a side note, you'll see many different variations of what the SMART acronym means, but now we're looking at what's in the implementation guide specifically for TDLP. So achievable in this case includes the original concepts of assignable and realistic. So basically, are there people qualified and available to do the work that's required to accomplish this goal? Is the work even possible with the available resources? And those resources could be people, it could be equipment, it could be space, facilities, software, any number of different things, okay? So really what you're looking at, can we pull this off? You know, you can have all the best ideas in the world, doesn't mean you can actually bring them to fruition. So we have S, M, A, and now R relates to relevant, and that means relevant to our learners' needs. And we all know this is something that we consider in everything we do in adult education. You know, our students are not mandated to be in our classroom. They're there because they choose to be. So again, you can have a fantastic goal, but if it's not relevant to your student population or the student population that you're targeting, it might not be so helpful to them, and it might not be an achievable goal. And then T, we have time frame, but time bound, time frame, time related, that there is a specified time for the goal. Does anybody have any questions about this? You can put it in the chat pod if you have any questions. Something else that I want to add, it's not in the implementation guide, but it's something that I've seen adapted just out there in the world, is coming up with a SMART-er goal, not just a SMART goal. And the ER stands for evaluation and review. This is something you really want to keep in mind from the beginning of creating these goals, because in your next year's report, you're going to have to write a narrative and reflect on your experience attempting this goal. So did you achieve what you set out to? Maybe it turned out better than you thought. Maybe some things didn't go as you planned, and you can write about what happened. Okay, there's no penalty for not achieving the goal or things not going the way you think they're going to. You know, this is experimental, but they do want you to document your experience accurately. So as you're thinking about these goals that you're setting, that measurable piece becomes really, really important. You want to set that up from the beginning so that when you're reflecting at the end, you're reviewing, you're evaluating, you have the data that you need in order to be able to do that and write your reporting. And that comes from experience. Trust me, it is worth the time up front to have a framework for all of that so that you're not scrambling at the end to try to get the data that you need. Okay, so why use SMART goals? Why would we torture ourselves with this? One of the main reasons is to catch inconsistencies or unrealistic goals. There's nothing worse than putting something in your TDLP and then finding out or figuring out later that you just can't pull it off. I mean, nobody wants that to be what they report. So if you take the time at the beginning to have these conversations, you'll catch spots. And you'll see that as we're going through the examples today. where you could be more specific, or that's not really measurable when you put it that way. Maybe we change the wording and now it is measurable. So you'll see examples of that. Another benefit is to focus on priorities. So if you're having a conversation, planning sessions about your TDLP, you may have 10 goals that you come up with. Well, the maximum that you would put in your plan is 5, and you may not even want to start out with that many. Maybe you want to start out with 1 or 2. How do you prioritize what you should start with? Going through this process and analyzing each element of SMART can help lead you to your priorities. And your priorities are going to be probably the ones that are most realistic to achieve and most relevant to your students. And like I mentioned earlier, setting up an efficient tracking and reporting system for yourself for later, that is huge. So you want to be asking yourself those questions. How are we going to measure this? And you need to ask that before you submit your plan. And the ultimate goal is to get approved the first time you submit and not have to do a revision. And we see here that 9 people in the poll said that they submitted the TDLP and had it accepted the first time, which is great. And that's not to make anybody else feel bad that that didn't happen, but what I wanted to show you is that, you know, I think with a little bit of preparation and some time and effort up front, you can avoid having to do a revision, and that's the point of this webinar. Okay, so getting started, again, we're focusing on section G of the TDLP, which is about goals and outcomes. And what we're covering in this webinar is you'll find on pages 5 to 8 in your implementation guide. And if you've just logged in, if you look at the lower left corner of the screen, you'll see a pod that says Files, and the implementation guide, the handout for this workshop, and the actual presentation itself are all there, and you can download all of those. Okay? And the QR code that's here goes directly to the implementation guide as well. So something to keep in mind is that there's a new requirement this year. You need to certify that you've downloaded and read the implementation guide, and you also have to align your goals with learner outcomes and the Iste student standards. So just keep those things in mind as you're thinking about all of this information. Okay, so now that we're familiar with the framework itself and some of the plan requirements, let's look at examples of each element to see if they fit the SMART goal standard. And what you can do, you can post in the chat pod. We have a lot of people here, so that might get unwieldy. At the top of your screen, you'll see a person with their hand raised, and if you click on the triangle to the right, you'll see options for communicating with me and the others. And you can either agree or disagree if I throw a question out there. Somebody is saying they don't know what the Iste standards are, and I can share that with you. There's also a link in the implementation guide to those standards, and I put a link in the handout for this workshop. But Iste stands for International Society for Technology in Education, and it's a set of standards about digital literacy. And there are 7 areas. One is empowered learner, digital citizen, knowledge constructor, innovative designer, computational thinker, creative communicator, and global collaborator. And so I think the point of this, which I think is very valuable, is that the idea is that you're not just setting technology goals for the sake of technology. You're thinking about what is it that the student will be using technology to accomplish or to do. Okay, and you'll see the Anthony and Penny, hi Penny, are put links that you can go to directly in the chat pod. So again, the idea of associating your TDLP goals with the Iste standards is to show that you're focused on the use of the technology, not just the technology itself. So Sarah, hopefully that at least gives a brief idea about the Iste standards. And there's also a set of Iste standards for educators as well. So if you go to the, oh, and Penny just put that as well. Thank you, Penny, for reading my mind. Both you and Anthony. Okay, so we're familiar with the framework. Oh, and I just realized I don't think I said earlier that if you would please identify yourself in the chat pod and let us know if you have more than just you following along, let us know how many people are with you. That would be very helpful. If you just put that in the chat pod, my apologies for not saying that at the beginning, but just introduce yourself, make sure we have your name and your agency and how many people are with you. Thank you very much. Okay, now I think we can move on. So we're going to look at some examples of each element to see if they fit the SMART goal standard, and then once we have a sense of all the elements of a SMART goal, then we're going to look at goals as a whole and do they have all the elements of the standard that we're looking at. Okay, so we said S is for specific. So if we say students, okay, and again, you can just indicate you agree that this is specific or you disagree, or you can put it in the chat pod too if you'd like. But do you think students is specific? Okay, and people are still introducing themselves. So far it looks like people are saying no, it's not very specific. It's not specific enough, right? So you would say, okay, it's specific if you're comparing, say, you know, you're differentiating from administrators or staff or faculty, but really it doesn't tell you enough information to be considered specific. So what might be a better descriptor would be, for example, intermediate and advanced ESL students. Now, would you agree that that's more specific or it's specific enough? Yes, so you can see distinctly the difference between those things. Okay, so another example would be ABE ASC students. So that's a little bit more specific. You're differentiating between, say, ABE ASC and ESL students. But you could be even more specific with that by saying something like students earning a high school diploma. Okay, so I think you get the idea of this. Any questions about the idea of being specific? Okay, let's go to the really fun one that everybody loves. And in fact, this is actually the one that I think a lot of agencies tend to have trouble with or have to revise, is this aspect of measuring the success of your goal. So M is for measurable. And what if we say students will learn XYZ skill? It doesn't matter what the skill is. It's some technology-based skill or technology-related skill. Okay, we've got a snow, which I'm thinking is a no. Okay, and if you scroll through the participants, you may see people agreeing or disagreeing. Okay, you got mostly disagreeing, right? And some people are saying yes and no. What I want you to consider is that learning in and of itself is not measurable. How do you measure learning? It's not the learning that you measure, it's what can people do with the knowledge they've gained or the experience that they've had, okay? And this is something we're seeing at the community college level. If you're writing courses and trying to get them through and approved at the state level, they're no longer accepting learn something as an expected outcome of a class. You have to state what is it that the student will be able to do as a result of their learning, okay? So the reason I'm bringing this up is I want to show you a couple examples of what you could put instead, and I think it'll be clear. So instead of saying that students will learn a skill, you would instead say that students will demonstrate mastery of that skill by passing a post-evaluation with a score of 80% or higher. Okay, that might be one example. Or students will produce a digital portfolio that shows growth over the course of the semester, including XYZ skill. So I think you see where we're going with this. You want to be much more specific and descriptive with what exactly are you going to measure and how are you going to do it. So in the first example where you're talking about a post-evaluation, you would want to specify what that is. So in the chat pod, go ahead and share with me anything that you can think of that you could use to measure student success, or to know if students have achieved the outcomes that you set for them. Okay, so it could be CASAS tests, it could be EL Civics additional assessments, some kind of skills checklist, maybe that could be maybe an observation, teacher observation. Okay, so these are all really good suggestions. A survey, it could be a self-evaluation, it could be completion time in something like, a software, a particular software, or a learning management system. Someone suggested % of students participating. Okay, and again, is students participating what you're really looking for, or is it what they can do as a result of participating? So, and again, these are the kinds of questions you want to be asking yourself as you're coming up with your goals. It's really important to determine how you're going to measure success so that when you have to report back later, you have already collected that data and that information because you set it up at the very beginning. This is huge, and it's really worth taking the time to figure this out up front. And I think Portia would agree with me. We learned from experience how important that is. You will thank yourself a year from now when you have to write your narrative about your goals now, when you have to go back later, if you really pay attention to this measurable part. And Portia is saying indeed, so she does agree with me. I told you I learned from the best. Okay, so any questions about measurable? I think I've given you some examples. Other examples of measures might be things like course completions or level movement, reaching benchmarks, things like that. But I think you got most of the ideas that the reviewers shared with me. Okay, so A is for achievable. This is huge, and this really is something that you want to think about. You can throw together a goal and stick it in the plan and send it off, but if your goal really is not achievable, you're going to be frustrated later, and you're going to have to report on it and explain why it wasn't. It's much better to think about this up front and decide if something is achievable or not. So let's say the overall program goal is to increase the number of online and hybrid courses that you're offering. So would this be achievable? All non-credit faculty will be trained in online teaching and learning by fall 2019. What do you think? And you can either mark agree, disagree, or you can post in the chat pod. Ambitious. Okay, we've got a disagree. We've got some disagreeing. So realistically, this is probably not a realistic goal. And unless, well, it depends on how many faculty, right? Do you have one faculty member or just a couple? I mean, that is a good point. But realistically, unless you are a fully online institution, not every teacher needs to know how to teach online. So we know the California Online Community College is in development right now. Well, that's a fully online college. So you would expect that all faculty would be able to teach online. However, in most colleges, you're going to have at least some traditional face-to-face classes. We're moving more toward online and hybrid, but it will probably never be 100% at all the colleges. So there really isn't the necessity for that. And what you would have to do to make that happen, is that achievable? So is it necessary? Is it achievable? Also, something that you want to avoid, it's like we talked about with the measure of how do you measure student learning. That really in and of itself isn't the goal. It's what the student can do with what they learned. it's the same kind of concept with training. You really don't want training to be your goal. Training is a means to an end. Just because you train somebody doesn't mean that they're actually going to do anything with what they learned. So the training isn't the goal. What they're going to do with it is the goal. So in this case, for example, by fall 2019, one instructional faculty member in each non-credit program will be trained and certified to teach online and will begin teaching one fully online or hybrid course. Okay, so that's specific, it's measurable, and it's much more achievable than thinking that you're going to train all of your faculty to do something, okay? You have to think about your return on investment, right? Another, just a side note about this topic and something that you want to talk about in your discussions is, now in this case, this may not even be a training issue. This may be a hiring issue. You know, do you want to spend the time and effort training somebody to do something when you could float a position and hire somebody who already has the skills and experience? And that's something that you want to be thinking about for the future. How much time and effort and money do you want to invest in training, and what process do you need to set up to hire people who already have skills and experience? So again, as you're having these discussions, you want to factor in those kinds of things. So R is for relevant, okay? And one way that you can tell if things are relevant to students or not is to look at the results of the student technology survey that's required for the TDLP. Now, I'm going to put something up here, and I think we're going to get a mix of responses, but we'll see. So you tell me if you think this is relevant for your student population. Learn how to use a mouse. Is it relevant for your student population? And if you scroll through the list of attendees, you're going to see what I pretty much expected. It's about half and half. So you're going to see some people that say, no, not really relevant, and some people that are going to say yes. And I'll tell you, after I was in adult school for a long time, and at that point I would have said yes, very relevant. After being in the community colleges, again, for a few years, I would say for that student population, not so much. And again, this is, you have to assess this for your population, okay? And that's what your discussions will be about. What I found at the community college level is that fewer and fewer desktop computers are being used. Some laptops, but mostly iPads, tablets, and students are using their smartphones. They're not even using a mouse. So you could say, well, they might use it in the workplace, or it might still be valuable for them, and that may be the case. But again, if we're focused on what is most relevant, something like learning how to use a mouse may not be what's relevant for your students. So let's say it really isn't, what would be something potentially that could be more relevant? For example, demonstrate the ability to access, download, and use learning apps on a smartphone or tablet to practice skills outside of the classroom. Okay, and again, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. If learning how to use a mouse is important to your students and that's valuable, you build that in. But if it's not, then you think about what would be valuable for them. And hopefully they're communicating that with you through their survey, and you can see what technologies are they using, what do they need to learn, what do they see as being valuable to learn. Okay. Then time frame. Let's look at time frame. So if we just say we want to increase enrollment, we hear this all the time from administrators, right? And maybe there are administrators in the group here too. You may see this. So increase enrollment. When? Right? This doesn't give us any information about what time frame, compared to what. So consider something like this instead. Beginning in the 2019-20 academic year, offer 2 online or hybrid classes in each program per term, in addition to the existing schedule of traditional classes, to increase enrollment and student attendance hours by 10% from the previous year. Okay, again, I think you see where I'm going with this. Increase enrollment, really in and of itself, is not the goal anyway. You could have 100 students enroll and 10 people show up and 5 people attend regularly. Increasing enrollment does nothing for you. It isn't that you want to increase enrollment, it's that you want to increase persistence and student attendance. And so maybe, you know, course completions or something like that become your goal, not increasing the enrollment. So again, these are all the types of conversations and discussions really you should be having at a programmatic level or a school-wide level when you're doing strategic planning. And then specifically for the TDLP, you're looking at your goals related to technology and distance planning in particular. But these goals should not be just tacked on willy-nilly. They should be part of your overall strategic planning for your agency. Okay, so I'm sorry, I know this is the most boring topic ever, or probably one of them. There's really not a way to make this much fun. But now that we're familiar with the framework and we've looked at some examples of each element, let's evaluate some overall goals to see if they fit the SMART goal standard. Okay, and as we're going through this, if you have specific questions that you want answered, please put them in the Q&A pod. And I'm leaving time at the end so that we can do a little bit of Q&A and you know, hopefully we can get some of your specific questions answered if they haven't been through the rest of what I'm covering. Okay, and the Q&A pod is at the bottom of your screen to the left of the chat pod. Okay, so yeah, so we've looked at each element of the SMART framework, and let's look at some overall goals and see how they fit the elements of the SMART goal. So first we're going to look at a sample goal for ASE, and this comes from page 6 of your implementation guide. I did not write this. By the end of the school year, 50% of ASE learners in the high school equivalency diploma track will pass the high school equivalency test as measured by GED, TASK, or HiSET tools, and by preparing with the online curriculum and individual teacher support. Okay, so is it specific? And you can share in the chat pod what, if you think it's specific, what exactly is specific. So primarily think about the student population. Okay, we've got a mixed bag of agreeing and not agreeing. Okay. So the amount is a specific amount of learners. What about the type of learner? So it gives specific measurements, so we'll get to that in the second part. But just looking at, you know, do we know the specific student population? Okay, yeah, to me, I think this fits specific. So, and not only is it ASE learners, but learners in the high school equivalency diploma track. So we're also differentiating between students earning their diploma and earning equivalency. Okay, so it's pretty specific. Okay, so now is it measurable? So we have the specific tests that are listed. We see the percent of learners that we want to pass those tests, right? To me, what's missing with the measure is that we don't know in relation to what. So saying 50% will pass. Well, what was the pass rate before? So, for example, do 40% of students currently pass the equivalency test so that the goal is actually to increase the pass rate by 10%? That seems attainable within 1 year. However, if the current pass rate is, for example, 20%, and you want to increase to 50% in 1 year, that may not be a realistic goal. Okay, so I would be a little bit more descriptive of what that measure is and in comparison to what. Okay, then let's see, let's look at achievable. Okay, is this achievable? I think it really depends on what's being done now and how far the program has to go and the students have to go in order to reach that 50% mark. Okay, and Peggy says, if this is the first time you've posted this goal, there won't be anything in your history to compare it to. Well, you could compare what was the pass rate. If you're saying now you want the pass rate to be 50%, what was the pass rate before? If you have never offered this program, yes, you wouldn't have anything to compare it to. That is a very good point. But if you've offered the program before, then you would have something to compare it to. So thank you, Peggy, for pointing that out. That is important. Okay, one of the things that made me think this is achievable is that there is online curriculum and individual teacher support that are both built into this. So that sounds like there's a structure, and the students have a choice of 3 different tests that they can take. They can take the one that they choose. So that to me seems achievable. Anybody else have thoughts about that? Quite a few people have said they don't think it's achievable. And obviously some of this depends on the staffing. So if you're saying individual teacher support, do you actually have teachers that can provide that support effectively for these students? Online support and teacher support seems vague. So maybe it would be better to flesh that out a little bit and be a little bit more specific about what exactly that looks like. That's a good point, Audrey. Thank you. And I think you see, when you're looking at these samples, you look at these ahead of time, then you start working on your own goals, and you evaluate them with this framework, you'll catch those kinds of things and realize what you have to describe a bit more. And also, when you write up your goals, you'll use a rationale. Why is this important? How did you come to the conclusion that this should be a goal for your plan? Okay, and now let's look at, is this relevant? Hopefully there's one we can all agree on. Do we think this is relevant for this student population? So yeah, so most people agree this is relevant. Yay, we got that one. Okay, and is it time-bound by the end of the school year? Okay, so we have a time frame. So the question really is, what's the change, and is the change doable within the time frame? But the time frame is stated, so okay, we're good. Any questions about this before we move on to the next example? Oh, I see people typing. Okay. So let's look at an example for ESL. And I was given permission by one of the adult schools to adapt and use one of the examples that they used for this year. Shelley asked, does the time frame have to be a specific date, or is end of the school year acceptable? I think end of the school year, but I would state by the end of the 2018-19 school year, just to be very clear which year you're talking about. And especially something that always confused me a little bit is that you submit the TDLP on the in January, but you're writing about the academic year. So I would just be as specific as you can. I don't think it can hurt to be clear. Okay, so the example for ESL. During the 2017-18 school year, XYZ Adult Schools ESL program will expand the use of a particular software for blended learning from 2 classes to 4, with 80% face-to-face and 20% online distance learning. Students will complete online assignments with a minimum score of 70%. The focus this year will be on employability skills, including vocabulary and language needed for areas of career interest, building employment portfolios, and practicing soft skills needed to get and keep jobs. If the data proves this strategy effective for increasing learning gains, XYZ will expand to more classes in 2018-19. Okay, so specific. Do we agree? Okay, so most people agree it's specific. Okay, the only thing that occurred to me is that the only thing I would specify further would be which levels of ESL, and Anthony's saying the same thing. You can tell those of us that are from ESL. You know, my first instinct is 20% online distance learning might be too much for literacy or beginning level students, so maybe you would target intermediate and advanced. I certainly don't think it would hurt to specify that. I think the assumption here is that it would be all ESL classes or all levels. Okay, so that would be the only thing I would suggest as something to clarify here. And I think others are agreeing. Is this measurable? So we're going from 2 classes to 4. We have a minimum score on assignments, and they're also going to be creating portfolios. So we not only have a measure, but we have multiple measures, which sounds great. Okay, is it achievable? So if they already attempted this and had success and now they're expanding, the assumption would be that yes, this is doable and they know what they're getting into, they know what's involved, they have the software, they must have the teaching staff to do this, so it sounds achievable. And what I like about this is that it's based on past experience, and it's expandable, and there's forward thinking to the next school year as well, and it sounds to me like a move toward institutionalizing this project and moving it from being grant funded perhaps. Okay, and then is it relevant? Oh, and Anthony's asking what % of students will achieve 70%? It sounds like that's the expectation that all students will, but that's a good point. So that could be more specific. So thank you, Anthony and Audrey. And so relevant. Oh, and Audrey, we were saying earlier, so we don't know if low-level students are included in this, so that would be part of the specific part is, you know, maybe low-level students aren't even factored in here. Maybe this is only advanced students, so we don't know that yet. Yes, this is relevant with the focus on workforce preparation and you know, career pathways and all of that. This is very relevant to what our students are interested in and needing to do. And then is it time-bound? Yep, very clear, the timing and the plan for expansion. So this is a pretty good, solid goal that doesn't really need too much tweaking, right? I mean, we can always, we're teachers, we can always make things better, right? But this is a really good, solid example. And then one more we'll go through real quickly because I want to make sure we leave a little bit of time at the end for questions. Again, this is an example from your implementation guide on page 7. This is for ABE. As a result of this technology integration project, by the end of the school year, 70% of ABE learners will demonstrate developed career readiness skills in improved literacy skills in math as documented by the assessment built in the online curriculum, by teacher observation, and by CASAS tests. While using a combination of commercial online curriculum and teacher-created online assignments, learners will meet the academic standards of the course. So let's just say overall, do we feel that this is pretty good? It covers all 5 of the elements. And we're looking, most people are agreeing, some are not. So this is a pretty good one also. You could probably be a little bit more specific about which, which curriculum you're using and level of passing, things like that. What I do like about this is, again, there are multiple measures. It's not just one indication of whether or not this approach is successful or not. The other question I had that I would want to know is how are the teacher-created online assignments connected to the commercial? So does that mean that teachers are creating assignments that fill the gaps of what's missing from the commercial curriculum? Are they targeted to the student population? As a reviewer, I would have some of those questions. And so I think as you're discussing this, you could fill in some of that information. But overall, this is a pretty good example. I would hope so, because it's in your implementation guide as an example. So hopefully this process has helped you to prepare for what you'll do at your own agency. As you move forward, you may want to use some of the strategies that we've used here. Have everybody come up with an idea, and you meet and go through the SMART framework and analyze it. Have we been specific enough with our target audience, our target population? Do we have at least one indicator or measure of success, and maybe we want to include more than just one? Is it achievable? Do we have the people available? You might have somebody who could do the work, but let's say they're going out on maternity leave or on sabbatical, or, so you need to be asking those kinds of questions in your planning stages. And let's do a little summary before we do Q&A, just what we've covered here today. So SMART in the TDLP context stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time frame. Okay. Each goal should focus on learner outcomes. This is very important. Not just what students are learning, but what can they do, okay? And they need to align with the Iste standards for students. You should refer to the implementation guide as an ongoing reference tool. And remember that this year it is required that you download it and read it, and you have to certify that you did that when you submit your plan. And very important, please remember that the OTAN folks can help. That's what they're here for. And on page 1 of your implementation guide, it tells you where to go for help if you're having technical problems with the website, and who to contact for help at OTAN if you need help working out the content of what you're going to submit. And I think I can speak for them that they would much rather you pose a question ahead of time and get some feedback before submitting the actual plan that somebody has to review and then give you feedback, and you have to go through the whole process again. So they'd much rather be proactive about it. Please don't hesitate to ask questions, and also, ask people at other agencies who've done this before. If you're doing this for the first time, don't feel bad about feeling overwhelmed or like it's not totally intuitive. It really is a process. And, ask for all the help you can get would be my advice. Something else too, Melinda mentioned we're recording this webinar, and you'll be able to share it with others at your agency if you think that they would benefit from hearing the same information. So hopefully this session has helped you understand the value of using the SMART goal framework to help plan and prepare your agency's technology and distance learning plan. Copies of the presentation, the supplemental handout, and the implementation guide are available in the Files pod in the lower left of your screen if you haven't downloaded them already. And you can also find all my training materials at frizteach.weebly.com. And then a copy of this session will be posted on the OTAN YouTube channel, and that's listed in the webinar handout, that channel address. A repeat of this webinar will also take place on Tuesday, January 8th from 1 to 2 p.m. if you can think of anybody else who would benefit from the information. And, oh, thank you, Marjorie, for posting the address. I'm also in the process of developing a 5-minute video screencast that will give a very brief overview of the SMART goal framework for TDLP. So it will be a helpful refresher for those who've participated today, but it will hopefully be a helpful tool for any planning sessions you might have with others at your agency, just to make sure everybody's on the same page. And remember, if your agency is WIOA funded and you'd like to arrange a face-to-face training for your agency, district, or region, ideally, please make a direct request through OTAN, and Anthony posted the contact information. So thank you so much for participating today. Please stay if you have questions that you posted in the Q&A pod, and I'll do my best to answer them or refer you to someone else who can. Depending on how many people stay, we could probably open it up so that people could use their mic and ask questions, but I like the idea of using the chat because then there's a documentation that other people can refer to. You are very welcome. Thank you to everybody for being here. Thank you, Portia, for teaching me what I know. I appreciate it so much. And Anthony is promoting the next OTAN webinar, which is Monday, December 3rd. That's next Monday, from 1 to 2 p.m. And the topic is The Right Stuff, Writing Skills for ESL and ABE Students, presented by Francisca Wentworth. And you can go to the link Anthony's providing to sign up for the webinar. You're very welcome. And like I said, stay if anybody wants to discuss some of the questions. I'm scrolling through now. One of the questions that I had actually that I put in the Q&A, so I wouldn't forget, is I know in the past there used to be a way that we could look at each other's technology and distance learning plans after they were approved so that we could see the projects that other schools are doing, and maybe if you have a similar student population, instead of going through the whole experiment yourself, you see what someone else is doing, and you could either replicate it, or maybe they tried it and it didn't work out so well, and so you know to forget those ideas. So I'm not sure if anybody from OTAN could answer that question. Is there still a place where we can view each other's, view other agencies' approved TDLPs? And let's see. Why is a TDLP due so late in the school year? My previous supervisor always made me put the end of the current school year as the time frame. That is a very good question. Netta said, OTAN is working on samples, but no place to view each other's plan. Okay, and I can't remember, I don't know if Portia is still here. Portia, do you remember where we were able to find that before? I think it was years ago. Oh, and I just saw that somebody wasn't able to log back in. This webinar will be repeated on January 8th, but also it's being recorded and it'll be posted on the YouTube channel. So unfortunately that takes out the interactivity for you, but you can go back and get all of the information. Sigrun, I think that was who mentioned that. Okay, so Nate is saying that CDE's request, we do want to move this date up, and we're just waiting for the green light from the CDE. So thank you for acknowledging that. And Shelley, great question. I have asked that question many times myself. Audrey was saying on the ESL goal, could you just say 90% of students will achieve an average minimum score of 70%? Sure. Yep, and that's much more descriptive to be able to specify that. And, you know, depending on the level of students, maybe if you're working with lower level students, maybe it's not 90%, maybe it's 70% of the students will achieve 70% minimum score or whatever. But I think your point is that you could specify what percentage of students would reach a certain benchmark. And then, yeah, Sarah is saying, not having the TDLP and the professional development plan in the same quarter, probably a good suggestion. Now, the other thing is, again, when you think big picture, really what we need is like a strategic plan that includes all of these different elements, right? But having it so fractured is part of what complicates it. There can be too many deliverables at the same time. And Portia was saying that she thought that the original plans were posted on the distance learning page to be able to see each other's. Let's see. The plan is for the entire school, not just one or two courses. Yes, so the technology and distance learning plan is for your WIOA-funded programs. But what you want to do is you want each goal to be focused on one program. So even if the goals are similar, you still have a different student population. You might use different resources. So you would have, a separate goal for ESL, a separate goal for ABE, ASE. I hope that answered your question, Sachiko. Okay. And this is great to hear from OTAN that they hear, how having all these deliverables at the same time and, different plans that really should be related to each other or connected to each other, it would make sense to make some of those changes. So thank you, OTAN, for passing along the wishes from the field. And then will this slideshow be shared in printable form? Peggy Squires, on the left-hand side of the screen where it says Files, you'll see my PowerPoint. You can download it and just save it in PDF form. You can do that conversion directly in PowerPoint so that you could share it with your tech plan team. And my notes are in the version that I uploaded in case any of that might be helpful to you as well. And then, like I said, I'm working on a 5-minute video screencast that just highlights the framework itself and one example of specific, measurable, all of that. So at a minimum, maybe you could send that out to your tech plan team ahead of time. They can all take a look at that and know the framework that you're going to use for your discussions. I'm going through the questions here. No need to answer my question. Oh, I probably already did. What is the title in YouTube for this presentation? Sylvia is asking. It's not uploaded yet, but it probably, what did I call this? Smart Goals for TDLP, or Smart Goals for Technology and Distance Learning Plans.
Sylvia, once we get it closed captioned, it'll be posted to our YouTube channel. So give us about a week or so.
Yeah, and if you just go to the YouTube channel, you should be able to find it pretty easily, I think. And then Christina Hyatt is saying, last year our goal was about ESL students. This year we want to direct our attention on ABE, ASE. Are we starting from scratch or adding to what we did last year? If it's the same goal, but you're focused on different students, just state that. And you're going to have to write a narrative of what you did last year and maybe a rationale for why you're switching student populations. Or if you started with ESL students and you're continuing what you started, that continuation can also be a goal to either continue or expand on what you already did, and then you're expanding it to ABE, ASE as well. But you want what you're doing for ESL and what you're doing for ABE, ASE to be submitted as different goals in the plan. And Netta, I don't know if you have any thoughts you want to share about that as well. But that's my understanding. Even if you're doing similar projects, you want to distinguish between the different student populations because you might use different resources with each one. Okay, and I'm getting the thumbs up. Yes. And you'll also see notes about that in the implementation guide. There are some tips in there about how to deal with that. Okay, we've reached 2 o'clock, and I think did we get to the end of all the questions? We got a thank you. Oh, one more. Is it acceptable to have my goals for this year just continued as is from last year? We're such a small district, it's hard to implement anything new. My understanding, and from what you see in the implementation guide, I believe, yes, that if you set goals last year and you want to continue what you did, I think if there's any way that you can add something, probably that would be ideal. But just describe your rationale for, you tried it, it's successful, and you want to continue with what you're doing.
So, Karla,
anybody from OTAN want to pipe in?
Also help you. Can you hear me, Karla?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
So, yes, you can definitely, so you have a progress report and you'll tell us how you did on your first set of goals for the last year. But we do encourage you to modify. If you choose to use the same goal, that's great, but you would have to look at not only the year, but also, possibly change a percentage, that kind of thing, and what else you can modify to that specific goal. So we don't want to see a copy-paste, but if you choose to go to the same direction with the goal, just make sure to look at how you might modify that.
Okay, thank you very much for clarifying that. And Shelley, maybe what you want to do is take a stab at it and then, send it to Netta ahead of time and, would this be satisfactory? Or, and take a look at it before you actually send in your plan. And that's what OTAN is there for, is to help. Okay, good luck, everybody. And if there aren't any more questions, I think we're wrapping up. I'm so glad that this was helpful. And when you fill out the evaluation form that you'll receive in your email, please let me know if there's anything that was missing or I could have spent more time on or done differently, because I'll take that feedback into consideration when I repeat this in January. So I really value your feedback. So thank you so much, everybody, and thank you, OTAN, for hosting.